Is marriage really built on trust? Or is it just an agreement between two people to ignore the cracks until they can't be ignored anymore? When it comes to infidelity, what happens when the person you vowed to love, honor, and cherish breaks that promise? Some say betrayal can break a marriage in an instant. But what happens when that betrayal leads to murder? In Atlanta, Georgia, on the night of March 3, 2017, a devastating and violent confrontation unfolded between a husband and wife. Tyrone Whitehead and his wife, Shandra, seemed like the ideal couple. A real estate agent and a devoted father, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, raising their children, and showing the world that they were happy. But beneath the surface, things weren't as perfect as they appeared. Their marriage had a dark secret, one that would ultimately cost Shandra her life. Tyrone had been having an affair for months, hiding it from the woman he promised to love forever. And when Shandra found out, in an attempt to save her marriage, she confronted her husband. The argument began like any other, a confrontation about lies, deceit, and broken trust. But then, it escalated. And in the heat of the moment, Tyrone made a choice that would forever change their family. What happened in that room? How did a man go from infidelity to murder in the blink of an eye? Before we dive into the shocking details of that fateful night, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Stay with us as we uncover the truth behind this chilling story. Because in the world of betrayal, not everything is as it seems. Tyrone and Shandra Whitehead's marriage began like many others, full of hope, love, and the promise of a bright future together. They met in their late 20s, both ambitious individuals determined to carve out their own successes in the world. Shandra, a 31-year-old real estate professional, was known for her strong work ethic and her ability to juggle multiple responsibilities. She was a loving mother, a devoted wife, and a pillar in her community, always putting her family first. Tyrone, at 35, was the man everyone seemed to like. He had a natural charm, and people were drawn to him. He worked hard, though he had a tendency to move from job to job, searching for a career that could provide stability for his growing family. When they got married, it felt like a perfect match. They had a shared vision of what their future could look like. A happy home filled with laughter, children, and a sense of togetherness. They settled in a quiet suburb of Atlanta, raising 2 young children and building their lives together one day at a time. In the early years, their relationship was filled with the kind of optimism that many young couples experience. Shandra would often talk about how she felt lucky to have found a partner who seemed to complement her so well. Tyrone, in turn, praised Shandra for her unwavering support, and they often enjoyed spending time together as a family, taking trips to nearby parks, celebrating holidays with loved ones, and cherishing simple, everyday moments. But like any marriage, theirs wasn't without its challenges. Tyrone's tendency to switch jobs often left the couple in a state of uncertainty, especially when it came to finances. The pressure of raising children, maintaining careers, and juggling household responsibilities sometimes led to tensions. There were moments of doubt, arguments over money, and the stress of keeping their dreams alive. Yet through it all, Shandra remained optimistic, believing that the tough times were just a part of building a future. As with many marriages, there were periods of closeness and distance. Tyrone's job changes and long hours started to strain their connection. Shandra, while handling her own busy career and motherhood, felt the weight of being the anchor for the family. She worked hard to maintain the balance, but there were times when the demands of life made it harder to stay connected. Despite these struggles, the couple pushed forward. They celebrated their successes together, like buying their first home and watching their children grow. Shandra would often reflect on how far they had come from their early days of renting an apartment, and Tyrone would reminisce about the simplicity of those moments. They were a family, built on years of shared experiences, victories, and challenges. Their love was tested many times, but they always found a way to weather the storm, or so it seemed. But even in the happiest of marriages, cracks can form in the foundation, sometimes without either person realizing it. And when those cracks go unnoticed for too long, they can turn into something far more dangerous. What was happening behind closed doors in the Whitehead home? and what would eventually push a loving family to the breaking point. The evening was typical for Shandra Whitehead. Kids running around, dinner on the stove, and the steady hum of life moving forward. But as she stood in the kitchen, something felt off. She couldn't quite place it, but it was there, like a shadow lingering in the corners of her mind. Tyrone had been acting differently lately. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way his phone seemed glued to his hand. Shandra had let it go at first. Life was busy. Work, kids. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but deep down, something felt wrong. Then, one night, after dinner, she finally decided to confront him. It had been a week of strange behavior. Tyrone was staying out later, coming home exhausted but evasive. He'd become more distant, and one thing she couldn't ignore anymore was the way he was acting around his phone. She asked him, "Who were you talking to earlier today?" Tyrone looked up from his plate, a slight hesitation before he answered, "Just work, babe. You know I've been busy." But it wasn't the answer that unsettled her. It was the way he said it, the way his eyes darted away from hers. Shandra knew him. She knew when he was hiding something, and right then, she felt it. He was lying. Later that evening, when Tyrone went to shower, Shandra found herself standing in the living room, staring at his phone. Her mind raced. Should she? Shouldn't she? She picked it up. Her fingers hovered over the screen, and in a moment of doubt, she unlocked it. There it was, a message from another woman. At first glance, it seemed innocent. A friendly, "Hey, how's it going?" But as Shandra scrolled, the messages became flirtatious. Compliments, inside jokes, the kind of thing she hadn't seen between her and Tyrone in a long time. Then, the words hit her. Asterisk, "I can't wait to see you again soon." Asterisk. Her heart sank. It wasn't just a friendly conversation. It wasn't a work friend. It was more than that. Tyrone had been seeing someone, and the thought crushed her. Shandra felt the anger well up inside her, but she didn't confront him immediately. No, she needed to know more. She needed to understand just how far Tyrone had gone. For the next few days, she watched him closely. The late-night texts continued. He was still being secretive about his phone, and every excuse he made for staying out late felt more and more hollow. Finally, Shandra could take it no longer. One night, when Tyrone was out with friends, she called the woman. She needed answers. The phone rang once, twice, then finally, a soft voice answered. "Hello, who is this?" Shandra asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but it was trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. The woman hesitated for a moment before responding. "Who is this? What do you want?" Chandra's chest tightened. "I want to know what's going on between you and Tyrone." There was a brief silence on the other end before the woman replied, her tone changing. "Look, you should talk to your husband about this." The woman continued, "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I swear. I didn't know about you. But he told me things weren't going well in his marriage." Those words stung. He told her things weren't going well in their marriage. Shandra had no idea where to go from here. She hung up, the phone slipping from her hand as she sank into the couch, her mind racing. How could Tyrone betray her like this? He had been lying to her for months. But the truth was undeniable now. The man she had trusted, the man she had built her life with, had been hiding a secret. And it wasn't just one lie. It was a web of lies, each one more painful than the last. When Tyrone came home that night, Shandra didn't say a word at first. She simply looked at him, the silence between them suffocating. Tyrone walked in, a slight smirk on his face, as if nothing had changed. But Shandra wasn't smiling. She stood up slowly, and her voice, calm but filled with hurt, broke the silence. "I know about the woman," Shandra said, each word coming out like a jagged shard of glass. "I know about your affair." For a moment, Tyrone didn't move. The seconds stretched on, each one dragging painfully as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, his head turned toward her, his eyes cold and emotionless. For the briefest of moments, Shandra saw something flicker. Guilt? Regret? but it was gone before she could grasp it. "What are you talking about?" Tyrone said, his voice low, almost mocking. He didn't even flinch. "You think I'm stupid?" She spat, her voice rising, raw with emotion. "You think I wouldn't notice the late nights, the texts, the lies? I know about everything, Tyrone." The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in as her words echoed in the space. Tyrone's eyes narrowed, his face hardening. There was a moment of silence between them, thick with resentment and pain. Then he spoke, his words cold, detached. "You don't get it, Shandra," he said, his voice flat, like he was speaking to a stranger. "It wasn't about you. It was just fun." Chandra's breath hitched, the sting of his words sharper than any slap. Fun. That was it. Everything they had built, all the years, all the love, reduced to a few cheap thrills. A hollow excuse. Her heart thundered in her chest as the anger took over. She stepped forward, the distance between them narrowing, and for a moment, she wanted to lash out, to scream at him for what he had done, for everything he had thrown away. But instead, her hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails biting into the skin of her palms. "How could you?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "How could you do this to us? To me?" Tyrone's face twisted into a grimace. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered, turning away, trying to walk past her. But the anger surged again, and Shandra wasn't about to let him leave. Not this time. Not after everything. "Don't you dare walk away from me, Tyrone!" she shouted, her voice rising to a fever pitch. He paused, his back to her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What do you want me to say, huh?" he sneered. "That I'm sorry? It's too late for that." The words hit her like a slap, a final insult that cut deeper than she could have imagined. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. Everything inside of her screamed to stop, to walk away, but the rage burned too bright, too fierce. "You've destroyed everything," she cried, her voice breaking, the raw pain bubbling up. "This family, me, you've thrown it all away for what? Fun?" The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. Tyrone stood there, motionless, his jaw clenched tight. Then, without warning, he turned back to face her, the coldness in his eyes like ice. "You never understood," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You never gave me what I needed." Shandra recoiled, her breath hitching as she looked into his eyes. Eyes that had once been full of love and warmth, now nothing more than empty, hollow pits. There was no remorse there, no regret. Then, without another word, he reached behind him, his hand coming to rest on the cold metal of a gun. The sight of it made Chandra's heart skip a beat. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the air thick and suffocating. She opened her mouth to say something, but before the words could leave her lips, the sound of the shot rang out. The deafening bang reverberated through the room, through her entire body. The pain was instantaneous, sharp, searing. It was as if everything inside her shattered at once. Her legs gave way, and she crumpled to the floor, her vision blurring. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder, the sharp metallic taste of blood rising in her throat as she gasped for breath. Her world began to spin, the room tilting in and out of focus, each breath more labored than the last. Tyrone stood there, his eyes wide, his hands still gripping the gun. But it wasn't shock on his face. It was something else, something cold, something final. Chandra's vision began to fade, and for a brief, fleeting moment, she wondered if this was really happening. But then the darkness closed in, and she felt herself slipping away. The silence in the house was deafening. The cold echo of the gunshot still hung in the air as Tyrone stared down at Chandra's body. He had done it. He had crossed the line. But he couldn't afford to let it end like this. Panic flooded him as he quickly dropped the gun and stepped back, his mind racing. He had to make this look like something else. Anything else. A robbery gone wrong. Maybe? He quickly moved around the room, rifling through drawers, overturning furniture, trying to create chaos. A scene that would tell a different story. But even as he worked to stage the scene, deep down he knew it was too late. There was no way out now. The sound of sirens wailing in the distance broke the stillness, and Tyrone's heart raced. Would he be caught? Would the truth come out? What would the police find when they arrived? Would Tyrone's lies hold up? Or was this the beginning of his downfall? The investigation began the moment officers stepped into the Whitehead home. The scene told a story, but not the one Tyrone had tried to craft. The living room, with its overturned furniture and scattered belongings, looked chaotic at first glance, but detectives quickly noticed the lack of forced entry. The lock on the front door was intact, and the windows were undisturbed. Shandra's body lay motionless in the center of the room, a single gunshot wound to her chest. The position of her body and the absence of defensive wounds didn't align with Tyrone's claim of a violent intruder. Detectives took in the details: the angle of the bullet, the blood spatter patterns, the items conveniently knocked over but untouched by dust. It all felt staged. Tyrone sat at the dining table, his hands trembling as he clutched a glass of water. His story came in fragments, each detail carefully chosen but lacking conviction. "I heard a noise," he said, his voice uneven. "When I ran out, I saw her lying there." Detective Harris, observing from the corner, said nothing at first. His eyes lingered on Tyrone, noting the lack of urgency in his tone, the absence of shock in his expression. Something was off. Hours turned into days, and the inconsistencies in Tyrone's story began to unravel. Phone records showed no emergency calls before the incident, but there were late-night texts to an unknown number. The so-called break-in showed no signs of entry, and neighbors reported hearing no sounds other than raised voices from inside the house earlier that evening. By the time the police questioned Tyrone again, the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Confronted with the contradictions, his calm demeanor began to crack. His answers became defensive, his body language more erratic. And then came the moment they had been waiting for. Tyrone faltered. He hesitated when asked about the gun, how it had come to be in his possession, why it wasn't locked away. It was enough for the detectives to take him in. As Tyrone was escorted out of the home in handcuffs, the neighbors watched in stunned silence. The man who had once been the picture of charm and stability was now the prime suspect in his wife's murder. The question lingered in the air. What kind of man could do this? Was this truly a moment of rage, or had Tyrone planned it all along? The investigation was just beginning, and the truth was darker than anyone could have imagined. The courtroom was tense as the trial of Tyrone Whitehead unfolded, each moment building to a boiling point. The gallery was filled with Shandra's family, her friends, and members of the community, all of whom were desperate for answers. Tyrone sat at the defense table, stone-faced, his eyes betraying nothing as the prosecutor presented a case that would send ripples through Atlanta. The prosecutor, with a calm but forceful voice, laid out the facts. Tyrone had lied about the break-in, staged the crime scene, and left out key details that pointed to premeditated actions. The details of Shandra's final moments, the inconsistency in his statements, and the evidence of his affair painted a picture of a man whose emotions had spiraled out of control. Family members took the stand, their voices trembling as they recounted the life they once shared with Shandra. Her mother, with tears streaming down her face, described her daughter as a loving mother, a dedicated professional, and a friend to everyone. It was clear that Shandra's death had devastated her loved ones, leaving an unfillable void. As the trial progressed, Tyrone's defense tried to paint a different picture. They argued that the shooting had been a crime of passion, a momentary lapse of judgment spurred on by betrayal and rage. But the prosecutor wasn't swayed. This wasn't an impulse, they argued. This was calculated. This was a man who could not accept his own wrongdoing. The closing statements were charged with emotion. Tyrone's fate was now in the hands of the jury. The courtroom held its breath as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. When the jury returned, the tension was palpable. Guilty of second-degree murder, the foreman declared. Tyrone's face remained impassive, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed a hint of frustration. His family looked on, some in shock, others quietly weeping. The gravity of the verdict sunk in, and the room grew heavy with the weight of it all. In the weeks following the trial, the sentencing took place. Tyrone Whitehead was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read aloud, Shandra's family members broke down in tears. While the legal system had done its part, it could never bring Shandra back. For her children, the pain was immeasurable. The future they had envisioned with their mother, one of love, stability, and security, had been stolen in an instant. The community, which had once seen Shandra as a beacon of hope, was left to mourn not only the loss of a woman who had touched so many lives, but also the violent way her life had been taken. Shandra's story became a reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions, of the fragility of trust, and the destructive power of betrayal. As the trial concluded and Tyrone was led away, the question lingered. Could any of this have been avoided? How many relationships are hanging by a thread, bound by lies and misunderstandings, waiting to unravel in a moment of rage? Shandra's story is one of heartbreak, betrayal, and devastating loss, a stark reminder of the fragile balance relationships hold. It's a tale that prompts us to reflect on the importance of communication, accountability, and addressing conflicts before they spiral out of control. As you take in this tragic account, we encourage you to think about the relationships in your own life. Are there unresolved issues? Conversations left unspoken? Don't wait until it's too late to confront the hard truths. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more gripping crime stories that explore the depths of human emotion and the consequences of our actions. Like, comment, and share your thoughts on this case. Could this tragedy have been prevented? What would you have done in Shandra's shoes? Stay tuned for our next story, where we uncover another chilling tale of crime, betrayal, and the search for justice.